Thanks, Mark, for the kind introduction. And here are my disclosures. So I've been invited to give a history of the World Federation of Hemophilia involvement in blood safety and supply issues, and notably blood donor deferral, starting with the tragedies of HIV and hepatitis C in the 1970s and 80s. And these led to major changes in the manufacturing of factor concentrates following that tragedy. And to end up with a review of the 16 years of the work of the Blood Safety Supply and Availability Committee, what kind of issues we've been looking at. So HIV/AIDS was the electroshock that has made blood safety the #1 priority of blood establishments, blood transfusion experts, and hemophilia organizations now for more than 3 decades. The fact that this emerging pathogen was handled so poorly has only added to the trauma. And this story has been the subject of numerous scientific papers, books, and public inquiries. So the first case of this syndrome was recognized by doctors in 1980, though we know today that the virus was transmitted from chimpanzees to humans in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the 1920s. But by July 1982, cases were being observed in the 4 H's. 4 H's being homosexual men, heroin users, Haitians, and hemophiliacs. And it was suggested that the pathogen was blood-borne, yet no real action was taken. Cases continued to surface through 1982, including in an infant who had received a blood transfusion at birth, and still governments, blood establishments, and industry could not agree on what to do to protect recipients of blood and blood products. Meanwhile, heat-treated factor concentrates were being developed as a safety measure to protect hemophiliacs from hepatitis B. In early 1984, the virus was finally identified, an assay was developed, and HIV was shown to be heat-sensitive. And over the next 2 years, heat-treated factor concentrates were introduced in many parts of the world. An HIV antibody test was developed to screen blood donations, and donor deferrals were introduced for those populations most at risk, namely men who had sex with men, IV drug users, and people with hemophilia. Now, these are some of the reasons that have been cited to explain why it took so long to react to the emergence of HIV in the blood system. The novelty of the risk, a refusal to face the horrible reality, demands for absolute scientific certainty before action, the fear of discrimination in the hemophilia community, a desire not to offend the gay community, a desire not to lose blood donors, lax regulatory oversight, and financial considerations among blood bankers and manufacturers. I think all of these reasons have some truth. But by 1986, the lessons of HIV had not yet been learnt, and history was repeated. Non-A, non-B hepatitis had been known since the 1970s, but considered relatively benign. Nevertheless, some countries, including the US, decided to reduce the risk through introduction of hepatitis B surrogate testing. Other countries waited several years, and thousands of transfusion recipients were unnecessarily infected. In 1990, the hepatitis C virus was identified, and antibody tests were introduced to screen blood donations. In the plasma product field, enhanced viral inactivation processes meant that factor concentrates in many parts of the world were free of HCV as of 1988. As I said, donor deferrals to protect the blood system against HIV started to be introduced in 1984 and 85. Men who had sex with men were deferred indefinitely in most blood systems. And over the year, donor deferrals were introduced for other groups and for other reasons. Last week, I checked the Canadian Blood Services website and found 45 different deferrals to protect donors and recipients. In addition to the big 3, HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C, these deferrals are designed to protect recipients against a host of risks, including variant CJD, malaria, dengue fever, chikungunya, West Nile virus, Chagas disease, and just this year, Zika virus. The MSM deferral has been by far the most controversial because it targets a group of people who have been subject to widespread discrimination for a very long time, if not forever. and donor deferrals are by their very nature discriminatory. Today, many governments and blood establishments are doing their best to be no more discriminatory than is warranted to protect public health. So window periods for HIV, HBV, and HCV are now fewer than 30 days, and window period donations are the biggest risk to safety. So in recent years, many countries have reduced the indefinite MSM deferral to 1 year, and this is a strong tendency likely to spread. 2 countries, Italy and Spain, have adopted a behavior-based system whereby a physician interviews all donors on potential risks and decides eligibility on a case-by-case basis. However, HIV rates are much higher among approved donors in those 2 countries, and I don't expect that this strategy will win much favor. In South Africa, there is no deferral based on MSM activity, as the epidemic there affects men and women equally. South Africa is a good example of why WFH cannot take a specific position that applies to the whole world. So specific policies are left to individual countries. WFH's general policy says this: the WFH recognizes that donor deferral policies are discriminatory. However, legal decisions have upheld the legality of such discrimination if they are judged to be justified in the interest of public health. And decisions on blood donor deferral policies must continue to put safety first and be made on the basis of epidemiology and not as a result of public or political pressure. That statement is now available on the WFH website. So while HIV and HCV contamination of factor concentrates can be considered among the worst medical disasters in history, they led to enormous and rapid advances. Over the years, the plasma fractionation industry has developed a multi-layered, redundant approach to ensuring the safety of plasma-derived medicinal products. And there are 6 steps. Selecting only healthy people through careful qualification of donors, screening each donation with antibody and nucleic acid tests for multiple viruses, a plasma hold to allow time for a concern to be reported by the donor or by the plasma collection center, screening mini pools of plasma with antibody and nucleic acid tests for multiple viruses, HIV, hepatitis A, B, and C, and parvovirus B19, purification steps including chromatography, and finally viral reduction or removal steps including solvent detergent treatment, pasteurization, and or nanofiltration of the final product. While no one would suggest dropping any of the 6 safety steps, 2 of them, testing of each donation and viral reduction removal processes, are primarily responsible for the high level of safety of these products today. Of course, the proof is in the pudding. Surveillance of recipients is the ultimate test to whether the safety steps are effective or not. So data shows there has not been a transmission of HIV, HBV, or HCV through plasma-derived medicinal products using these 6 safety steps. The last HIV transmission was in the late 1980s, and the last HCV transmission was in the early 1990s. One case of variant CJD through factor VIII is strongly suspected. So what has been the role of the WFH over the last 15 years? Unlike factor concentrates, fresh blood components, including cryoprecipitate, could not be subjected to viral reduction processes until recently. In 2000, Dr. Bruce Evett, member of the WFH board, published a paper on the lifetime risk of HIV through the use of cryoprecipitate. In a study using epidemiological data from Venezuela, Dr. Evett found that a person with hemophilia who receives monthly infusions of cryoprecipitate prepared from plasma of 15 donors over a lifetime of treatment, 60 years, has a 40% risk of being exposed to HIV-contaminated blood product. Given this degree of risk, he recommended that medical care providers carefully evaluate the use of cryoprecipitate, except in emergencies or when no virally inactive products were available. And after the events of the 1980s, world governments were very averse to risks of HIV through blood products. So this study was widely used by national member organizations to make a case for the use of factor concentrates in preference to cryoprecipitate. I should note that some things have changed since 2000 when this study was done. Nucleic acid testing, in addition to antibody testing for HIV and other viruses, has been introduced in some blood systems, reducing the risk of a window period donation and reducing the risk that HIV-positive donation would escape detection. And also viral inactivation processes for cryoprecipitate have been introduced in some countries, notably Egypt. So in 2001, the WFH created a committee to oversee safety, supply, and availability of coagulation therapies. It's changed names 3 times, but maintained essentially the same mandate. One aspect of the mandate was to monitor emerging pathogens and their potential to affect therapeutic products used in hemophilia care. Now, weird and wonderful pathogens have emerged almost every year, transmitted by our friends in the animal and insect worlds. So SARS and the flu viruses from chickens, hepatitis E from pigs, variant CJD from bovines. The insects in question here, from top to bottom, are the mosquito, responsible for transmitting many viruses, the reduvid bug, which transmits Chagas disease, and the tick, which transmits babesiosis. So fortunately, with the possible exception of variant CJD with certain products way back in the 1990s, none of these pathogens survive the modern manufacturing processes for factor concentrates. These are some of the other safety issues the committee has followed over the years. Now, it's worth noting that there is a clear shift in focus from pathogen threats to the issue of possible immunogenicity of certain classes of factor products, as you see at the bottom, the last 3, including the Rodin study and the CIPIT study. The committee has dealt with a large number of supply and availability issues, ranging from the shortage of factor VIII in 2001 to surplus cryoprecipitate, work to make sure that short-dated donations would not go to waste, to maintaining factor VIII and IX on the essential medicines list. More recently, health technology assessments in Sweden and Germany have come before the committee, and a recurring topic has been national self-sufficiency and compensation for blood donation, and Brian O'Mahony will go into detail on this talk in the next session. And there's been no shortage of regulatory issues on the agenda, and Mark Brooker will delve into these in the third talk. And finally, I'd like to recognize all of these people from 15 different countries who have served on the committee over the past 15 years. And they participate in bi-monthly teleconferences, which, depending on where you lived in the world, usually happen at the ungodly hours of 6 a.m. or 10 p.m. So thank you for your attention.